Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are now at the little poem, The First Dandelion. This is poem number 12 of the 58 of Sands at 70. It is a salute to spring, and I love the fact that we can just be kind of la-ti-dawing our way along through Leaves of Grass, and all of a sudden we hit a poem that is in some ways completely different from almost every single poem that we have read in Leaves of Grass. I love this about Whitman. I love it that he wrote this later on in his life. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, and you've been with us from that very first introductory word come all the way through the inscription poems. We did give a set of introductory comments to Sands at 70, and we just finished with the Wallabout Martyrs. Now, our Nortons will tell us about this poem, that it was first published in the New York Herald, again, a number of these poems from this cluster coming there, March 12, 1888. It is a salute to spring, which appeared the day after the beginning of the great blizzard of 1888. Now, I find that a remarkable little insight as well to give us a sense of timing. I love the trinities of this poem, and I love to consider the power of Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, if winter come can spring be far behind. You will remember Dandelion later when we meet Soon Shall the Winter's Spoil Be Here. So you'll remember that. We'll come back to this poem then. He says it this way: simple and fresh and fair, from winter's close emerging, as if no artifice of fashion, business, politics had ever been, forth from its shiny nook of sheltered grass, innocent, golden calm as the dawn, the spring's first dandelion shows its trustful face. Now, I'm inclined to think that Whitman was very influenced by Wordsworth and a little poem like My Heart Leaps Up When I Behold a Rainbow in the Sky, or I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, and the celebration that Wordsworth loves to give to nature. Notice, Whitman plays a fascinating rhetorical game. He begins with the word simple. His celebration of nature, and his celebration of spring, and his celebration of the grass, we'll get to it, right, is always going to be simple. Now, Whitman has been faulted for this. Let's just say this out loud. Whitman has been faulted for being so simple, so often direct. I can see him somewhere right now smiling and saying, I thank you for the compliment, because he loves the simple. And this is why so many of you love to read his poetry. Notice the idea of fresh and fair. By the way, that is three, right? Fresh and fair. Notice we are now from winter's close emerging. I told you how he likes to use close and close, right? Okay. And of course, emerging will take us back to the very beginning of our study with Shut Not Your Doors. The idea that there is always some kind of growth. There's always some kind of dynamism. Again, we call Whitman not an optimist, but an informed optimist. Why? Well, of course he knows about all the horrors and the tragedies in the history of the world. He knows about, of course, the Civil War. He was there. And yet, it's always going to be about emerging. It's always going to be about what happens next. That is to say, Shelley's line, if winter come, can spring be far behind? That idea. The dandelions in the spring prove to us there's always reason to hope. As if no artifice, by the way, I love this. Artifice gets used one time in Leaves of Grass, it's right here. As if no artifice of fashion, business, politics, there's another three, had ever been. In other words, there's something remarkable about the first dandelion. It somehow transcends everything else. And watching a 2-year-old play with a dandelion is a remarkable thing to witness. I mean, they can play with them forever, can't they? I mean, take a kid to a field of dandelions and just watch them have a bit of fun. Or blowing bubbles, for example. I mean, it's amazing how children can remind us that it's the simple things that provide some of the greatest joy. And then he'll say it. Forth from, again, from emerging now to forth from its sunny nook of sheltered grass, and obviously he has to be smiling. I told you guys, he has fun all the way through Leaves of Grass, playing the game of grass, right? And it's like coming out of the grass, takes us back, obviously, to Song of Myself 6, no question. And then the dash makes us think of our Emily Dickinson, who obviously would love a poem like this. Innocent, golden, calm as the dawn, there's your threes. I love that he uses the word simple and then he goes to innocent. And yes, obviously we're thinking now about our William Blake and Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience, and all of that. The spring's first dandelion shows its trustful face. Now, why is a dandelion trustful? Well, I think that's the point. I think that's the point he's making. In other words, you have to learn to trust the cycles of nature. And if you can learn to trust the cycles of nature, then you can learn to trust yourself and those around you. It is an interesting little simple poem that, much like the great poetry of Wordsworth, begins simple and ends complex. You'll remember in the poem, My Heart Leaps Up When I Behold a Rainbow in the Sky, you remember those last lines, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety. Here it's simple and trustful, and I think he's borrowing heavily from the Wordsworthian tradition. There's no question. Where, yeah, it is a simple poem, but it's a really profound poem. In other words, in the midst of the nastiness of winter, whatever that is in your life, you got to remember a dandelion is coming. The spring is coming. It gives us some sense of hope, and that's obviously the two-way message here. Spring is proof that there really is always reason to hope. Why? From out of the grass will come the dandelion that will remind us, oh yeah, as bad as the winter was, again, the blizzard of '88, it's okay. We're going to get through this. And this is the role of Whitman as poet. And I love that it ends up in Sands of 70. At 2B, I love all the trinities. I love all the threes because it gives a balance to the poem. And it's a fun poem, by the way, to read out loud. I love to read this poem to children while they're swinging at the park with the first dandelions that come up as well. At 3A, well, obviously I've mentioned the two classic poems, Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, If Winter Come Can Spring Be Far Behind, and Wordsworth's Rainbow. Finally, at 3B, just to own a little poem like this, and I love that we can jump into a little poem like this, spend a few minutes, and you could smile for the rest of your day. How about this one? Do you love spring? Do you see it as the promise? Do you see it as the evidence of greatest hope? I certainly, no pun intended, I certainly hope so. I'm getting excited to read Emily Dickinson poems next, huh? Thank you.